All right. The other thing that I'm curious about is the claim that I just see everywhere, absolutely everywhere, that we all know there's some figure that they're using. It's in the tens of thousands of people are either dying or will die in the absence of Obamacare. And you took this on directly in your article. Of course, we're going to link to that article at contrakrugman.com/76. But tell us about that and what you're arguing there.
Yeah, I mean, I find the claim fascinating, and it comes from so many sources at this point. Krugman himself in the column says there's no real question that Obamacare is saving tens of thousands of lives every year. And the question to start with, sort of, well, how on earth would you know that, right? And you could either try to find actual data on Obamacare, or you could go and look at other studies. And that's what these proponents are doing, is they go back and they find a study that shows people who have private insurance tend to have slightly lower mortality rates. Or they look at what happened in Massachusetts when then Governor Romney radically expanded private insurance, not Medicaid, and saw a decline in the death rate. And they say, all right, well, gosh, if every time you give someone insurance, the death rate goes down, then let's count up everybody who got an insurance under Obamacare and assume that that's how much the death rate has gone down. And there are two huge problems with that. The first is those studies look at private insurance, and that's not what Obamacare did. We also have a lot of studies of Medicaid, and time again, what they show is that Medicaid fails to push death rates down or really achieve much of any benefit for physical health, especially for the able-bodied adults that Obamacare focuses on. And so we shouldn't actually expect or think that studies show that what Obamacare did was going to reduce death rates. The even bigger problem is we have actual Obamacare data now. Obamacare has been in effect for a couple of years, and we can look what has happened to mortality rates in this country. If it's saving tens of thousands of lives, that would show up in the data. But in fact, exactly the opposite has occurred. Last year, life expectancy fell in this country for the first time in decades. Mortality actually went up, and we had about 80,000 more deaths than we would have had if mortality kept falling under Obamacare at the rate that it had been falling before. Now, I think it's an overstatement to say Obamacare is killing tens of thousands of people. That, of course, is what Krugman would say if he was trying to argue the other side. But I think the fair reading is to say, look, we have the data, we have the historical data on Medicaid, and it's not saving lives, and we shouldn't have expected it to.
Oren, let me just, this is such a crucial point, let me restate what I think you said there and what I think your argument is to make sure our listeners get it. So you're saying on where they're getting the numbers from, because obviously these people aren't just throwing darts at a board and come up with a number. That if you ask them where you getting this figure of whatever 15, 20,000 lives a year, and that's the thing, folks. They're saying per year. I mean, so these are huge numbers they're claiming. You're saying that what they did was they went back to something like Romney's so-called ObamaCare measure, which actually did, whether you think it's a good thing or not, it did expand private insurance coverage. And then looking at the decrease in mortality from that kind of experiment. And then they're looking just at the, quote, expansion of health insurance under Obamacare without worrying about whether actually it was due to private versus Medicaid expansion. And then they're just multiplying. And that's where they're getting this figure from. So even on its own terms, that's a dubious calculation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they're saying, to just use round numbers, well, gosh, in Massachusetts, for every million people who got insurance, death rates went down by 1,000 deaths a year. And hey, look, we gave 20 million people insurance, so the death rate must have gone down by 20,000. And that's just, it's an apples to orange comparison, and it's not borne out by what's actually happening in this country.
Okay, and then the other thing you said is, hey, forget these, theoretical extrapolations. We should just be able to look at the numbers and see. And so I tried to do that as well. I was glad to have you come on and sort of confirm. But you can go to the CDC and look at this stuff. You can look at the rates. And what's interesting is the actual crude mortality rates in terms of just what percentage of the population, for every 100,000 people, how many people died. That number actually has been fairly flat for decades and rose slightly from about 2009 onward. But then the issue is they say, well, that's not a fair comparison because the population has aged. You don't just want to naively look at how many people, what percentage of the population die each year, because if the population gets older, then that would be unfair. So they have what they call an age-adjusted figure. And by some measures, it did look like the figures I was looking at, yeah, that figure has gone down from like 2007 to 2014 was the latest numbers I saw. And so you might say, oh, that's good. But if you look at the whole history, that number's been trending downward since the 60s. In other words, in general, for given adjusting for controlling for how old the population is, the percentage of people out of 100,000 that die every year, that number's been dropping, which shouldn't surprise people because things in general get better over time. And so the fact that number came down. So it's the classic case, it seems to me, and just you tell me, Oren, if you agree with this, of where they'll say like, oh, look at since the passage of the EPA and creation of that and the Clean Air Act, smog has gotten better in LA, so therefore we should thank the federal government for that. But then if you look at a prior history, you see, well, yeah, but air quality was improving even before the Clean Air Act. So it's not obvious that you should attribute all the gains since then to this legislation. Do we have something like that happening here too?
Well, I think the case is actually stronger than that because, like you said, age-adjusted mortality is the key metric here. It's been falling consistently for decades. And all of a sudden, last year, it didn't fall. It went up. And you have to remember with the Affordable Care Act, you can't go back and look at what happened in 2010, 2011, and attribute that to Obamacare because Obamacare and the insurance expansion didn't actually start until 2014. So what you're asking is in 2014 and 2015, did we all of a sudden see extra tens of thousands of lives being saved in the data? And not only do we not see that, we see the opposite. We see all of the progress we had been making suddenly screech to a halt. And if I could add one other thing that I think makes the case even stronger, if I were defending Obamacare here, I would say, okay, but that could be any number of issues, right? That could be the opioid crisis. That could be bad flu season. Maybe it was something else, not Obamacare, that caused this to change. But we actually have a very good control group because only about half the states did the Medicaid expansion under Obamacare. So if we have a situation where something else is forcing mortality rates higher in this country, we should expect that to still look a lot worse in states that did not expand Medicaid and look a lot better in states that did expand Medicaid. And so you can compare that and you don't see it. In fact, the mortality got worse in the states that expanded Medicaid. So even within the country, even in an environment of rising mortality, Obamacare is not making a difference. And that doesn't mean Obamacare doesn't do anything for anybody, but it does mean that this claim that tens of thousands of lives are being saved or that we effectively kill all those people if we oppose Obamacare, there's just no support for that in the data.
Well, I think I speak for Krugman when I say clearly what happened in the last year or two was that the fear of the Republican austerity caused people to have more anxiety, and that's why they died.
But yeah, strangely though, only in the states that, or more so in the states that expanded coverage the most.